Well, welcome everybody. Really appreciate you carving time out of your busy days to join us here at this month's MAG 10 meeting. The subject matter that we'll be focusing on today is political economy analysis. Some of you may be familiar, some may not, or at different levels. And that's why we've invited our guests, Marc and Craig. So just a quick snapshot. Political economy analysis is really about understanding the political dimensions, both formal and informal, of really any context, and really actively using this information to inform both policy and planning. So for me, essentially, it involves looking at the dynamic interactions between three sort of bodies of a community: structures, institutions, and stakeholders. But this is why we have our experts here today to really unpack it and explain it better than I do. And so let me just warmly welcome Marc Cassidy. Marc is the president of Adapt LLC. And Marc is a specialist in applied political economy analysis who advises and trains USAID and other clients on how to incorporate a thinking and working politically approach into their program and project design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation processes. I believe Marc is the author of the Political Economy Analysis Guidebook for the DG office at USAID. And also want to warmly welcome Marc home. He's been overseas for the last 3 weeks and just flew in last night. So Marc, I hope you've had a couple of cups of coffee and are prepared for, for some good questions coming up next. We also have Marc's colleague, Craig Grunwald, leverages over 15 years of field experience and expertise in grants, procurement, system strengthening, compliance, community-led development, training, activity design and implementation, and pre and post-award management to increase development effectiveness and local capacity. So Marc, Craig, welcome. Welcome to all the Miyamoto staff also. And with that, I would like to hand it over to you guys. Marc?
Thank you, Greg. Nice to meet you all virtually. I hope you're having a good day. As Greg said, I'm a bit jet lagged, so I'm actually going to hand it over to Craig to off, and then I'm going to come back in. So,
okay. Go get another cup of coffee, Marc.
Thanks, Greg.
Sounds great. Well, nice to meet all of you, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to actually share my screen here, and and turn my video off. Let's see. Okay, cool. Hopefully you can see everything. All right.
Yep.
All right, cool. So as Greg said, some of you may have already had exposure to political economy analysis, but understanding that some may have not, we have actually gone ahead and kind of given you a little bit of a detailed overview of the applied political economy analysis framework and kind of what PEA looks like in implementation, and then how we can apply that to Miyamoto's work. So our presentation is really going to focus on those key aspects. So we're going to introduce Adapt and explain why and how we think and work politically through applied political analysis, and then get into those applied aspects. All right, so we're going to begin here with a fun little cartoon we have, which says, I want you to find a bold and innovative way to do everything exactly the same way it's been done for 25 years. So if you haven't heard this before, perhaps at times you felt this way in your work. And that's really what thinking and working politically is all about. While we should certainly build on and refine the best practices that we've been doing over a long period of time, or just recently learned, it's also critical to ensure that our interventions are the best fit for the demanding context where we work. And that's what Adapt and other practitioners in the thinking and working politically space call doing development differently. So this cartoon helps us kind of stay grounded in that thinking. And it may seem obvious in our work that political and economic context matters. And I'm sure at a minimum, humanitarian assistance actors and all of us certainly employ informal political analysis in our interventions. However, as we'll explain through this presentation, we believe that thinking and working politically through applied political economy analysis is a better and more systematic way to analyze the political economy in our work. So I want to take you to another quote that we like to reference, and this is from Thomas Carruthers with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And it's from his really influential book, Development Aid Confronts Politics, which is core to our thinking at Adapt. And it really, gets to, despite our best intentions, we risk several things when we don't formally and intentionally analyze the political economy. So for example, we can misunderstand the causes of the thorny challenges on the ground. This can prolong humanitarian crises and cause us to miss the mark in our response, or even result in us working with the wrong stakeholders and actors. And in the rush to complete our deliverables or quickly respond to a humanitarian crisis, we can overlook strengthening local capacity to lead future disaster response, disaster risk management, or risk reduction activities when our support ends. Or in the worst case, we can fail to anticipate unintended harmful political or economic consequences of our interventions. So this quote really helps us kind of stay grounded in that as well. So how do we think and work politically? How do we get theory to practice? Well, thinking and working politically is an approach to development programming that deliberately builds space into the program cycle to analyze the political, economic, and social processes and the power dynamics that impact a given context, as Greg was alluding to in the beginning of the presentation. So think and work politically. So to think politically, we use political economy analysis, or PEA. This is really the theoretical aspect, but the field research methodology that we use to identify and unpack the underlying reasons why things work the way they do in a relevant context or system. And PEA, it unpacks the nuanced incentives and the constraints impacting the behavior of various actors within that context and system. And to identify those actors, we use stakeholder analysis and then analyze where the incentives of these various actors align. And where appropriate to bolster it, we also will use it in conjunction with other types of analysis, such as conflict analysis or gender analysis, to dig deeper into issues through a particular lens. So that's the think politically side of it. To work politically, we utilize and build upon existing implementation tools and mechanisms in our programs, in our contracts, in our grants to adapt programming to what is learned through our analysis. So to work politically, we use USAID's Collaborating, Learning, and Adapting Framework, CLA framework, which largely informs our methodology for operationalizing PEA findings. And later in the presentation, we'll give you a quick overview of some of the tools we can use to apply that in Miyamoto's work. So PEA and CLA, the thinking and working, combine for what we call applied political economy analysis. And we do applied political economy analysis at 4 levels primarily. First, we have the global level, which is where we would look at the relationships between governments, donors, corporations. This could be relevant, especially when you're working in the humanitarian context and you have several international actors involved. And then at the next level down, we go to the country level, where you get a general sensitization of the country context. But then one layer deeper, we get to the sector level. So in the context of Miyamoto, it would be humanitarian assistance, environment, infrastructure, etc. But then all the way down on the ground, you get to the program or issue level. And that's where we could really focus on issues around disaster response, risk management, and risk reduction. So applied PEA, though, importantly, can be conducted at one or multiple levels, and often it is done at more than one level. All right, so on to another fun little cartoon we use. And this one really helps us visualize the importance of formalizing the process of thinking and working politically. On the left, you'll see the path that illustrates the one we're tempted to take when we're under pressure to perform. And the priority is to complete our required deliverables. I'm sure we've all experienced this. And by no means is this path simple. Delivering in the environments where we work is really hard. So we like to call this the technically sound path. to addressing our development or humanitarian challenges. And in the time crunch to deliver, our tendency is to focus mainly on the technical. And as I said earlier, we do focus on the politics. However, that is usually done, our political analysis is usually done informally. So let's look at the rightward path now, which illustrates the more difficult path, but the one that we believe, Mark and I and others in the thinking and working politically space, it helps us deliver effectively and implement activities that are the best fit for achieving the impact we're seeking. So let's call this the technically sound, content aware, and politically savvy path, if you will. And the one other cool thing about this illustration is it's a curvy path on the right-hand side of the illustration. And that's reflective of the type of context we work in. It's certainly the path to our development and humanitarian objectives is certainly not linear. And very importantly, the technical doesn't get pushed aside when we look at the political economy. The technical and the political really go hand in hand, and that's the key point we're always trying to make. So when should we use applied political economy analysis? There are several use cases, but some of the most common ones are during project startup to have contextual awareness, or use what we call a small bets approach to really test ideas and activities before taking them to scale. Then there's also key changes or windows of opportunity in the operating environment. These can be political transitions around elections, natural disasters, which you're very familiar with, earthquakes, hurricanes, and in the civ mil space, military operations that could influence the operating environment. You can also use it, and we hope to use it for adaptive management and being able to iterate and learn and adapt throughout the program period, the program cycle, at any point during implementation. And then during business development or capture, for two reasons. One, makes you more competitive if you have a very context-aware proposal, but that's also critical once you actually win the award, because then you have to implement it. So having a well-designed program gives you a really solid baseline to build upon if you win that contract or that grant from USAID or others. And in rarer cases, but sometimes, like when developing a country or regional strategy, you can use applied PEA to kind of understand the dynamics across for an issue across borders. Okay, so then the real thing we're always trying to get to, though, and this is where the PEA framework comes in, is how we get to the why, and that is the framework we use, the applied PEA framework. So I'm going to walk you through that framework right now, just briefly, before Mark gives you a good illustrative example to kind of see this in practice. So though there are various purposes for political economy analysis, it is often done during startup or to respond to a specific problem or issue within the context of the project. So whatever the purpose, it is critical to first determine the levels of analysis or the level of analysis and agree on the core and supporting questions that will inform the study. And once we've done that, then we really dig into the analysis itself, which is comprised of really three core pillars. And the first of those pillars is what we call the foundational factors. These are deeply embedded historical, geographical, and political, sociocultural factors that link directly to the core questions. And they help explain why things are the way they are today. The foundational factors are typically studied during an initial desk review, which Mark will include in the steps of a baseline study later. The second pillar focuses on institutional factors and the formal and informal, what we call rules of the game, that again link to the core questions of our analysis and influence the behavior and incentives of the key actors and power brokers in a given context. So the formal rules are the written rules, the constitutional, legislative, regulatory rules that influence the behaviors of various actors and their incentives. And then the informal rules are the unwritten rules or the unspoken of norms, such as political graft, nepotism, ideologies, beliefs that also influence the behaviors and incentives of key actors. And then, very importantly, how all this applies to the here and now, which is our third pillar. That's the current events, such as changes in political leadership, economic shocks, natural disasters, pandemics, which we're all going through right now, that again link directly to the core question and influence the behaviors. But the rules of the game in here and now are also analyzed during the initial desk review, but they are really thoroughly unpacked and validated during the focus group discussions and interviews carried out in the field with key informants. And then as we analyze this information and gather this information, we really start to look at the dynamics across the three foundational pillars, the three pillars, including the relationships and aligned or competing incentives among those actors that we identify to really determine ultimately what their implications are on programming. And this is really the key aspect, right? All this analysis feeds into the recommendations that Adapt and others doing PEA will really use to inform how the program should move forward based on what's learned in the political economy. And once we've got those recommendations, which is the core output of our analysis, then we really want to focus on the implementation of those recommendations and really work that into our programming. So that's an iterative process, right? So we want to, once we've established the recommendations began implementing, then we want to continuously analyze the dynamics on the ground and in collaboration with the key stakeholders identified through our analysis. And this is what really allows us to adapt and iterate throughout the program cycle based on real-time changes in the political economy and data gathered during implementation. So this whole aspect of the framework here is what we call collaborating, learning, and adapting. It's constantly building on the initial findings, continuously analyzing the political economy, and then collaborating, learning, and adapting as we go to increase our impact and maximize our impact. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Marc now, who's going to give us an example from Haiti to kind of walk through what this would look like on the ground. Over to you, Marc.
Thank you, Craig. In order to make this a bit more concrete, this theory, and we came up with an example just for illustrative purposes. And we focused on Haiti, the humanitarian sector, and at the issue level or the problem level, they're synonymous. We decided to come up with some illustrative core questions for your consideration. Normally, the core question process takes quite some time to agree on, just because it's basically the focus of your investment, so time is required. But given our cursory understanding of what's happening in Haiti, we did in our research, we did come up with a knowledge question that would help focus the research. And it is as follows: why are gangs involved in disaster response in Lakai, and who facilitates their involvement? Now, with that knowledge, we will develop a set of questions that help us get at to answer that question. But to operationalize the knowledge, we came up with another question: what are the implications of gang involvement in disaster response? And how can we integrate this learning into future disaster risk management efforts in Haiti? And sometimes we if this were a real process, we would probably have a couple more knowledge questions and a couple more operational questions. But just for the purposes of kind of making this more concrete, we thought we'd do this. And now I'll take you through the framework that Craig just described and show you how these core questions are kind of applied to the Haiti case. So as Craig mentioned, the foundational factors are really the things that are slow to change, but nonetheless show how the past is still influences the present. And so the photos here are just illustrative of the colonial history, the natural disasters that continuously pound the island nation, kind of the legacy of certain governance styles, particular family, Papa Doc and Baby Doc, and how those are some of the foundational factors that could influence the core questions. So we normally, when we're doing our research, don't belabor this point, but we don't ignore it either, because one can assume that everybody has this knowledge, but it's better to actually find out how the foundational factors influence the core questions. Next slide, please. The rules of the game are more or less at the heart of political economy analysis. Rules of the game, as they influence the core knowledge and core operational questions, are normally divided into formal rules of the game. Those are the ones that are on the books. It's the laws, the statutes. And while the informal rules of the game are more the norms, the practices, the things that are not written down, that are harder to understand. And we investigate how the incentives that emanate from the formal rules, from the laws, as well as the informal rules, work together or at odds to influence the core question. So this is where we'll look at a number of different stakeholders and to see how they are influencing the focus of our research. So here is illustrative. There's gang members, there's the police, and of course there's the Senate as well. And we would dig deep into each one of these stakeholders, talk to the usual and the unusual suspects in order to understand how the game is actually being played regarding, in this case, disaster mitigation, disaster response, and the influence of gangs. Next slide, please. As Craig mentioned, the here and now is the current events factor, and how these current events also change and influence incentives to key actors and institutions in the country. So here you have, the most recent earthquake. You have the assassination of the former president, and now the contestation for office in November, the new elections coming up, and how that will influence the core question. The next slide, please. So the dynamics section is more or less the conclusion of how the above factors really converge to, explain why the why question, why things are the way they are, why in this case are gangs involved in this disaster response, who facilitates their involvement. And you don't need to write a master's thesis on this. It could be pretty straightforward and very operational, but unless you go deep into the kind of understanding the literature, you pay attention to the social media, you pay attention to the print media and then the television media, radio, as well as you have a number of interviews with people, it's hard to really kind of come with any sort of confidence that you understand what the dynamic is at play. And the dynamic really helps you answer the core knowledge question so that you can program so that you can understand what the operational context is in order to make really useful interventions that maybe you didn't consider before because you didn't have the opportunity to understand, the larger political economy and how it's influencing your programming. Next slide, please. So just briefly, the steps for a baseline political economy analysis are many, but I'm not going to go through them in detail because I want to get to your questions and to the discussion. But really, you got to focus on that core question development, and that takes longer than one may think. And you finalize the scope of work, you recruit the team. It's important to have at least one person who's done PEA before on your team. It's best if the whole team are PEA experts, but then you also need people who are, they are good in CLA, understand the programming of your particular donor. You need subject matter experts, obviously. So the team can really range anywhere from, let's say, 3 to 30 people, depending on the size of the research you're doing, and how quick you want the information back. And what I mean the size is the number of locations, the depth of the questions. Then briefly, as I mentioned before, literature review, desk review is is conducted, and then a workshop is kind of ties everything together so that we know where we're going. Everybody's kind of in agreement. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Here's how it's going to work. Here's who we're going to interview. Here's who we're not going to interview. And this is how the process will work. Next slide, please. Yeah, then basically the research happens. Basically, it's the primary research process consists of focus group meetings when feasible, and key informant interviews. Sometimes, on average, I say between 30 and 100 or 150, depending on the size of the research. And from that, we kind of triangulate the data. We oftentimes code the data that comes in, and then we develop a stakeholder analysis table to kind of put things in perspective. We provide preliminary findings and implications for programming, and then it's normally documented in a report with verbal oral presentations. Next slide, please. And just to kind of show we did a little bit of homework before this presentation, we found that your president aptly stated that disaster risk reduction is not only about the built environment, but also about those structures, but how those structures interrelate with communities, governments, and the private sector. Both context and process matters. That's what really stood out to us. For this reason, we also prioritize capacity strengthening and policy advocacy throughout our programs. So from what we can tell, you are doing a form of political economy analysis already. Perhaps it's not, I'm not sure if you are using this or not, but maybe it's not as systematized as this methodology, which is gaining traction and interest from donors all around the world and implementers around the world. With those few remarks, I'll hand it over to Greg.
Great, thanks, Mark. Yeah, and we really enjoyed that quote because it's all about PEA and CLA in a lot of respects. So,
Greg?
Yeah, go ahead.
Greg, did you have something? Greg?
No, I'm good. Keep going, please.
Sure, yeah, we just got a few seconds left here. So, yeah, now how do we actually take that thinking of Dr. Miyamoto and really apply that to Miyamoto's work? So, three things stick out, in terms of the themes. It's really around collaboration in Miyamoto's work, and then action, and then data. And that really gets to the heart of what CLA is in terms of applying political economy analysis findings. So some ways that we brainstorm for really using CLA tools in your work is potentially collaborative scenario mapping. So once you've done the PEA and you have your findings and you've analyzed who those stakeholders are, you actually do scenario mapping with those stakeholders that are with that political and economic lens. You can train and provide continuous technical assistance to your staff, your technical policy and risk communication specialists, for example. Train them in applied PEA so that when they're working with experts on the ground, they are doing that through a political and economic lens. But then when it comes to actually implementing and applying this in activity streams, that's where the data-driven aspect of this comes in. And that's where I'm really focusing with Mark a lot on small bets approach from my own experience with grants and direct implementation. How do you use a small bets data-driven approach? Well, you could co-create project designs with the key stakeholders that you identified through the stakeholder analysis. So not just design something from the outside and then try to see if it works, but actually collaborate and take the time to really figure out what the stakeholder, where the incentives align and program around that. And then you really work with the monitoring, evaluation, and learning staff to develop custom indicators based on those PEA findings and that project design. And then very importantly, in those activity streams, you build in flexibility to pause, reflect, and iterate during activity implementation, getting to that feedback loop I was showing in the framework. And then where possible, once you find things that really work, because it's so important to involve the other sectors to bring things to scale, you can use tools such as leverage and cost share, which are becoming more prominent in USAID work, especially to take those viable approaches to scale. And then there's also an advocacy aspect to the work that was implied in the literature on Miyamoto International. And that's where programming as a campaign is very interesting, because you kind of take all the information that you've gathered through the small bets approach or just through the activity implementation, and you take the PEA findings themselves to develop targeted messaging for your advocacy efforts, just to make them really drive home the points you're trying to get across and the changes you're trying to see. So that's just some examples of how CLA can be used in your work. There's many more, I'm sure, but it's a humanitarian assistance is really ripe with opportunities for this. So then let's talk about Adapt. Why partner with us? Well, there are several reasons we think there as well, but three that kind of stand out are, it helps you save costs and achieve higher returns on your investment, because it is expensive to hire staff with these expertise. Sometimes it takes a lot of recruitment effort and they could be difficult to find. So in terms of time and resources, you can save there. We already have a pool of experts that can be hired as needed or seconded to projects. Sorry about the sirens here. Develop in-house expertise. Hold on a second. Sorry, folks.
I can take over while Craig's
Go for it, Marc.
back.
Better now. There we go. I can just wrap it up. So then developing in-house expertise. This is really critical. We really want to move beyond a practice area approach and really help teams incorporate thinking and working politically into their organizational culture. So that's an aspect of training we really focus on with your team. And then you can also benefit from the thought leadership. Like we got Marc, who, as Greg mentioned, really contributed significantly to the thinking and working politically through applied PEA guidance for USAID, which has informed all of USAID's work on this topic. And then our experts have also delivered over 40 PEAs worldwide. It's our core focus. I won't get too much into it. You already know Marc. We also have Alex, who's our senior political economy advisor. He's really pioneering our remote applied PEA model, especially during COVID. And we have Gemma, who's our gender and evaluation specialist, and she's helping us mainstream those cross-cutting issues into our PEA approach. And then we have Gretchen, who's our advocacy and communications specialist. She's helping us also integrate PEA into the MEL processes, as well as myself. And then last and certainly least, me, I'm our systems expert, really taking the grants implementation experience to figure out how we apply these PEA findings into our partners and clients' activities and workflows. And as far as our experience to date, this is our last slide. We've done, like I said, over 40 studies and assessments worldwide in 30 countries across at least 4 continents, and primarily focused on agriculture, democracy, human rights, governance, environment, and global health. But very importantly, we can use PEA across all sectors, issue areas, locations. And a lot of the DRG work, especially around governance, and would really be applicable, our past experience to Miyamoto's work, and in terms of trying to address the institutional side of capacity building and disaster risk management and mitigation moving forward. There's just a quick snapshot of where we've worked for visualization. But with that, that's our presentation. I think we did it in 30 minutes, so hopefully that was on time. And we really want to save the rest of the time here for questions from you guys, and we'll answer them the best we can. So thanks for your listening here.
Terrific. I'm going to take that off. There we go. Great. Marc, Craig, thank you very much. That was really informative. And I wanted to open it up to the team here, but I just kind of greased the wheels. A couple of questions, or one multi-part question. I'm a huge fan, as you know, of PEA, but oftentimes I see it as a plug-in activity, and maybe you have seen that in some of your work. So my question is, how do you drive it to the center? Or where have you seen organizations embrace it and drive it to the center? And then how do you keep it active? How do you make sure that it's not a report up on the shelf and your 3 years of implementation proceed forward? so again, how do you get it to drive to the center? How do you keep it active? And then the third part is, where do you see the uptake from USAID? And again, I know, with Mark, with your experience and mine at USAID, it's talked a lot about, but what does the actual uptake look like? And is it something that you think would be a niche? I mean, I know a lot of people talking about it. I don't think a lot of people are utilizing it as writ large as one thought 10 years ago. But like, how do we make that a niche project in the work that we're doing here at Miyamoto?
Oh, Mark, you're on mute.
Thanks, Greg. That's a really important question, because it is going beyond the one-off study, and it's talking about really what PEA was designed to do, which was to really create value for this sort of information within the development and humanitarian space. So not just have information in the heads of project managers and field staff, but actually have that information be systematized and debated among staff and valued as an actual product that you can basically sell to your donors and use, of course, for your programming, so that you avoid pitfalls. So how to mainstream is, as rather than just plug it in, is the challenge. Now, as Adapt matures and grows, we are getting asked to do follow-on projects. So first of all, it will be like, let's say you do your study, they like the study, they're like, well, how do we implement some of these recommendations? So then we'll basically be asked to come on for part 2, and we'll help them to implement them. And then there's the part 3, which is really, well, we don't really have enough money to keep you doing this. So could you help train our staff so that we could do that? And then basically we do that in now 2 different places. Probably third one is coming up. And, this is where, and I did do a little bit of this at USAID, you're talking about making sure you have the right people on staff. So it gets a little bit more in depth there, because, you have to have political thinkers, people who can understand and process data in a way that is not natural to everyone, just like math is not natural to everyone. And so we do have a way of kind of like, not holding one's hands, but like, let's say, what's the word I'm looking for? Partnering and mentoring, and kind of mentoring people through. So it's a combination of strict training, learning by doing, and mentoring. And I have noticed that the organizations that we work for that take this more seriously don't see this as a one-off experience. They see this as part of the kind of collaborative learning and adapting methodology that they either have built into their programming, or if they haven't, we help them build it in. That's where Craig comes in particular. So is that what you're looking for, or is it?
Yeah, that's helpful. I think, again, where are you seeing the uptake at USAID? Is it a particular bureau, office? So when people integrate this into their proposals or their implementation, where do you see the most excitement within it? Environment.
The environment people have become I remember they've become like, at the beginning, they're like, come on, don't mess with science, with getting this messy in the ways. But now the biodiversity and environment people have taken this to new heights. The market systems people, economic development, they're also more and more agriculture folks are trying to figure out, okay, we've been doing the same thing forever and nothing seems to be working. So they're very keen on it. The DG people are more or less, they want to know why the systems are not working. So we help them figure that out. We're going to come out right and say we have not done it in the humanitarian space. That's, thanks to you, we're getting this opportunity to make the case. And we do think it can apply. I do come from a humanitarian background myself. So I always was, when I was at IRC, was shouting this from the rooftops, and ironically enough, about Haiti, many years ago during the terrible earthquake, when, basically saying, we don't even know where to begin in this country. We don't have any presence there. Everybody and their uncle are there. Why don't we figure out politics and see where we can be most effective? And in that time there wasn't a great appetite for that. It was just like, let's spend the money. So I am against that sort of thinking. I know saving lives is very important, and if my life was on the line, I'd certainly want to be saved today, and not like, well, after they're done with the PEA. But there are a lot of people in the field. So anyway.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks, Mark. Well, let me open it up to the floor. Folks, any thoughts or questions for Mark and Craig?
I have a question. Hi, I'm Lucienne. I'm the Senior Communications Specialist. I just wanted to ask if this is ever applied more internally rather than looking at stakeholders and project sites, but if companies or organizations ever do it more internally to look at the reflections of politics in their own kind of structure and actions, or the history of how they might be perceived in a specific place. Looking at Miyamoto, what it means to be an American company in a place like Haiti, or what it means to have a Japanese name in a place like Haiti. Or sort of just looking a bit more internally to do that political analysis, and if that's ever done.
It should be, but it's rarely done because oftentimes, the light shines a little too bright for some people. So it becomes it can be used as a tool to do kind of like annual planning purposes. But of course you'll have to, the thing about PEA is that who gets to see the report is very important. People ask me, can I see the report you did for, Moldova recently? I'm like, absolutely not without the permission of the company, and they rarely give it because sometimes they name names. Sometimes they say this is where your real spoilers are. And if that gets out to the press, it could cause problems. So we keep everything very confidential. And as you can imagine, we do separate reports for public consumption as well, but they're rarely as insightful as the ones that are filled with that other information.
I'm going to add, that's really a very important question. I'll look at it from another angle. One of the key things for political economy analysis to consider are the organizational, the internal politics and decision-making incentives that drive implementing partners, right? I've worked, for a long time with one implementing partner in particular, and the insights you gain are really how what works and what will work and won't work within that institution of the organization. So PEA really needs to consider the internal incentives of the implementing partner and of the agency that's funding the projects as well, especially when considering how to operationalize findings. And that's another critical part of this field of work is you look at what's happening on the ground, but you also look at all the key players, in terms of where the funding is coming from. And when it comes to risk, especially, that's where organizations are typically really trying to be careful about doing anything too bold where it puts them at unnecessary risk in their own minds. But I think the irony of that is PEA can actually help you be more, risk averse because you understand the context more and you're making more informed investments. So, that's one really critical aspect of it. It's so critical to understand the internal politics of the implementing partner, of the donor, and of what's happening on the ground.
Perfect. Great question, Lucian. Thank you. Raul, please go ahead, and if you could introduce yourself too. Thank you.
Yes, well, I have a question if this analysis is going to be implemented here in our Latin American prepared countries. I seen it very interesting, and I think the idea that you presented is actually what we have seen that happens in, for example, I can speak about Guatemala. that the corporation have been investing since decades, but actually the human development indicators it seems to stay the same or going backwards sometimes. So I think this would be a good analysis to implement in a country like Guatemala, for example. So in order to seek for more impact. So I'm asking if there are plans to implement this here.
Thanks, Raul. Yeah, I think this was the first step. Again, I'm a huge fan of political economy analysis in many different contexts. So I think the purpose of today was really to have Marc and Craig introduce the idea, try to contextualize it for us. If there's, if Roberto and team feel like you'd like to get deeper in on this, then we could have Marc and Craig come back and contextualize it even further for the portfolio there. But I would be very enthusiastic if we find a way to bring this into the work that we do at multiple levels, because I really think it would have tremendous impact. But I guess that also brings up another question, Marc and Craig. No tool is perfect, right? So where are the shortcomings of this analysis, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah, that's good, Greg. It's like, we often say it's not a, silver bullet or whatever. It doesn't solve all your problems with the analysis. Sometimes I find working for international cooperation agencies such as USAID and others, the analysis, this is the thing about PEA, if you can't have paralysis by analysis, right? Because it's so much easier to find the problems than actually the solutions. So just today, Craig and I were on a call with some colleagues in another country and who are doing the primary research for us because we can't go there because of COVID. And we're just saying, we don't need, a 20-page document on why this sector can't thrive, and we need we know that we can do the literature review. We can get a lot of all those questions answered early. We can ask. This is a long way of just basically saying that unless you really focus on what can be done, what's the purpose really? I mean, it's good to have a better understanding of your constraints, but you also have to be looking for opportunities. And sometimes we have to do this research so quickly that we don't have enough time to really figure out what the real opportunities are. That's why we're really promoting kind of a longer term engagement with organizations so that we can help your staff kind of slowly chip away at these process. We can do the baseline PEA pretty quickly within, let's say, 3 to 4 months. And then after that, it's really kind of deepening it and broadening it so that you're always doing PEA. You're thinking and working politically all the time through CLA and other methodologies. But that's it. I mean, that's the whole, like the work plan, the pressure to spend money quickly, all those things that, we have to, those realities of political economy, realities of donor, those are where we sometimes, aren't as successful as we'd like to be.
That's great.
Right.
And, one of the, I don't know if it's a shortcoming of PEA or a shortcoming of just capacity is another challenge. I got into this because over the time in the field, especially, I learned all the tools of implementation, but you recognize quickly that there's a lot of great ideas, but people just don't know how to operationalize them. So whether it's political economy or not, it's very hard to understand the regulatory framework, and everybody kind of looks at USAID regs. They're like, they're too restrictive. Everything's too hard with USAID. But when you actually understand them, you realize how to use them to your advantage. And I think sometimes there's a challenge for folks to really understand why regs are written the way they are and what tools you really do have available in your toolkit to implement in the context where we do. And in actuality, there is a lot of flexibility in the mechanisms around grants and procurement to do a lot of the things we're talking about, but it's hard to find folks that have that real understanding of how to get things done and how to use the regs to their advantage. So that's kind of a shortcoming of the field in general. But when it comes to applying PEA findings, it's kind of something that also kicks in, that's why I'm here, really, to figure out how do we help people really understand how to operationalize this. We can operationalize it. There's a lot of
How to implement, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Roberto, you had your hand up and I see Diana has hers. Did you want to go, Roberto?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely we are super interested in applying something like this and a follow-up in that. As you know, 23 years ago, hurricane Mitch affected the whole central four countries in Central America. And those same countries have been receiving the same support in the relief from the same humanitarian organizations. So we should be analyzing why this is happening and how we can make a difference for those countries and impact their economies and the processes that the humanitarian world is doing. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, any thoughts or we
More of a statement. I agree.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
been doing a lot of work in Latin America recently. So yeah.
yeah, it'd be very applicable. Deanna, do you want to go?
No, sorry, perhaps I put the hand, raise my hand, but I didn't want to ask anything. Thank you.
Okay, all right, no problem at all, no problem at all. We have a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions, please put your hand up. Okay. I had one here. Oh, yeah, I guess again, kind of thinking about how you drive it to the center, in kind of the time we have remaining, Mark or Craig, where have you found it to be most successful in driving it into strategy, constructing strategies? So for me, that would be really, I can see it at the country level or the implementation level. But if an organization or a region would like to utilize this in the construction of their action plans or the strategies, what's your recommendations or what's your experience like on that area?
Yeah, if you could start thinking up to 6 months before your activity plan is due to your donor, that would be a good time, because it's depending on the size of the research you want. I mean, if your question is very specific, you can half that time. But normally that's a good time to begin the process, and then you can slowly chip away and get deeper. And we found that, donors, implementers who hire us to help them always use it to influence their work plan. It comes as it's important sometimes to make sure that so sometimes PEA basically tells you to do the opposite of what you're doing, which doesn't always make certain people very happy, because they're interested in protecting their jobs, right? So, which is natural, which is a normal human behavior trait. We all do it. So it's very you have to be careful, because sometimes you're basically saying, instead of working in Lakai on, given the gang activity is so heavy there, that you're basically going to be, you could be creating a deeper problem than you're actually solving. We consider working here in this sector on that region, because it seems like there's more champions and more likely sustainability after you leave. But the people who are, hired to work on Lakai are not so happy about that, as you can imagine.
And I think it's also about phasing, right? So as you get to the sooner you get into the PEA in the process, the better. But work plans need to be developed very early on as deliverable in most contracts, and they may be written while you're completing the analysis. But you can look at what can be done now versus what can maybe be done a couple months from now or in the next work plan cycle. So you can also look at phasing some of the findings into your implementation that way. So there's an ideal time to do it, which is as early as possible, but there's never a bad time to start in that sense. And you can always do something from it and then continuously do more as the windows open up in the program cycle to do that.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, I think we need to wrap it up. I, again, really want to thank Mark and Craig for sharing your valuable time with us today. You've given us a lot of food for thought. We'll reflect on the conversations internally, and I hope we'll be able to circle back to you to get a little bit more granular and perhaps work together. To all the staff members, thank you also for sharing your time. I'm sure the end of a very long day. So I hope you found this conversation also constructive and helpful. I see, Courtney, you have your hand up?
Sorry, no, I was just applauding.
Thank you.
I guess I'm getting used to the icons on Zoom.
Sorry. just thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks,
Craig.
everybody.
Thanks for the.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thanks for the
Appreciate it.
opportunity.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.